this podcast, we will be looking at storytellers, stories, and the reasons that oral storytelling is important in our world today. You would think with all the technology we have available that stories do not have a place anymore. They are needed more than ever. For in storytelling is where we find truth, we find reality, and we find the heart of what it is to be human. Welcome to the heart of storytelling. My name is Alyssa, and let's go on an adventure. You're in for a treat this week. This week I speak with US storyteller Jim Brulé, who worked with Rebecca Lemire, who I interviewed earlier in the season, on a book of grief and dying. This interview is just so far-reaching. We talk about working with grief. We talk about artificial intelligence. We talk about working with communities and interfaith and interculture. And then it ends with the most magnificent story that left me breathless and wordless. This is a treat for you. I hope you enjoy this interview with Jim. Welcome to this week's podcast. This week we're speaking with Jim Brulé, who is in rural New York in the United States. Welcome to the podcast, Jim.
Very nice to be here, Alyssa. Very nice.
Well, I'd love to hear about your storytelling journey because you've had quite an interesting one by the sounds of things.
I have. To start with the most recent, for the last 15 years or so, I've been doing what I call transformational storytelling. You also might call that spiritual storytelling, although it's not associated with any particular tradition or religion or anything like that. It's more about people. And what that means is I'd like to tell stories that invite people to grow and change by making them a little ambiguous and leaving parts of the story up to them to decide about. Most of them being traditional stories from around the world, but still, there's always an opportunity to look at the world differently. And I've been doing that, as I said, for about 15 years. I had a school that still runs in name, but the big programs ran for about 7 years, where I trained people to do this. So that's the short end of the story. And the short beginning of the story is I've had a number of careers, but they all centered around storytelling, although I didn't realize it always at the time. So I started out as a family therapist, and I did that for about a decade. I then worked, if you can believe it, in the 1980s in artificial intelligence, back in its early days. And that was all about storytelling, because I was trying to understand how experts made decisions. And so you have to get them to tell you a story, and then you have to tell it to someone else to write the program. I didn't write the programs. And then I was in the healthcare industry for a long time, helping doctors understand government regulations. And boy, you need lots of good stories to help them understand thousands of pages of rules. So I've been doing this in a lot of different ways for many years.
Yeah. So you're a psychologist, are you?
Psychologist and computer scientist, both. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. What a combination. Computer science and psychology. That's really fascinating. So, I mean, what you've been doing recently really draws upon that psychology background, doesn't it? What you've done
It
in the
does.
foundation. Yeah.
And I should mention the other side of that I'm doing now is a lot of work with folks. I'm what's called a death doula. So that means I work with people who are either themselves dying or have someone important to them who's at the end of life, and using storytelling around that and grief and loss a lot. So that's kind of my main focus right now. Yeah.
How did you decide to go into death doula? What was the driving force?
I don't know. It's certainly losing my own parents. My father 6 years ago, my mother 20 years ago. It was a piece of it, but I was already headed in that direction. I trained as a chaplain, interfaith chaplain for this big hospital we have, and I was drawn to work with patients who are either in trauma, in the trauma unit, or were on the cancer unit. And
Mm.
it resonates. So I said, well, that's what I'll do.
So
Yeah.
tell me about this. Tell me about what that looks like in a storytelling sense.
Well,
What would be?
storytelling, yeah, it goes in two directions, really. And to give you a little context, I also work at a place that's called an Omega home. And that's where people go when they're at the end of their life and they don't have the resources to stay with family and
Okay,
they
yeah.
don't want to stay in an institution. And it's really a big house.
Mm,
Um, and it's staffed with 350 volunteers who take care of 18 people. Um, and I'm their storyteller. Um, so I go in and I'll either listen to people's stories and try and help them tell the stories that they'd like to have told about them that reflect who they are, or I'll tell them a story from a tradition um, that just seems to fit the moment. And these aren't stories that say, and therefore, they're just kind of take you into a place of, hmm. And people really seem to appreciate that a great deal. Yeah.
mm. So how do you choose? I mean, obviously you've got a good bank of stories that you would
Yeah.
choose from. So what how do you choose a story for those sort of situations?
Well, excuse me, the answer is there's two answers to it. One is I have this huge bank and I know which ones kind of fit into that situation, but there's a lot of them.
Mm,
Um, so the real part is the story taps me on the shoulder and says, I'm the one.
mm,
I've learned to listen to that. Even the Kalahari in Africa say, tell the story that's pursuing you. And
mm,
that's my motto. So I will sometimes sit with somebody and say, there's two stories and they both want to be told, and I'm going to let them fight it out for a minute because I don't know which one to tell you.
Oh, I love that. Oh, I like that idea of just sitting with the story until it's
Hmm.
ready to come. It's beautiful.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. And so I imagine it takes a certain type of person to sit with the dying and with the grieving. What
It
sort of
does.
qualities do you think people need if they're going to do that sort of work?
Well, the first thing is you need to learn how to listen.
Mm,
And it's not so much what you say, it's what you don't say.
mm,
And that you listen, well, really with an open heart. And that sounds very poetic, but what it means is you've got to be prepared to be wounded because these are situations where there's often a lot of pain, emotional pain, spiritual pain. And if you're not willing to feel that yourself, you're not going to be able to listen as well. It's not that you shouldn't try, but that's what it takes. So part is learning to listen, and the other is how to be comfortable with silence. There's a lot of times I'll just sit with someone. I met with someone last week it was, and he had a terrible medical condition, and it was very difficult for him to speak. Um, I assumed it was because of his condition, and I asked him, would he like me just to sit with him for a while? And he nodded. And within 20 minutes, he was talking. And I hadn't said anything, but he needed to know that it was safe to talk. Um, Now, I'm not being a psychologist in those moments. I'm not saying, oh, I can see what's going on here. I was just being present for him. Yeah.
mm. I mean, where's that line between um, being a psychologist and being a spiritual self? I find
Mhm.
that a really fascinating place to be within. Yeah.
A psychologist, at least for me, a psychologist is in the room because somebody has said, I'm in pain and I need your help to get out of it. Um, but I'm looking at you as a psychologist to help me through that. And there's lots of good skills and techniques and tools to be used there, but as a psychologist, you're keeping yourself at a certain distance from the person so that you can be analyzing and saying, well, maybe this is going on, I'll try this. So there's that kind of thing is going on. It's going on in a different way when you're there as a spiritual companion. Um, you're not trying to figure out anything. You're trying to listen, you're trying to reflect. There is the sense, the stories that I tell in those circumstances are things that will sometimes provoke people into a new way of looking at things. But it's really important to say, I don't have an idea of how they should look at them. I don't have a sense of, oh, this will be better. If only they would X. Um, it's more a case of you're in an uncomfortable place, and maybe I can help you leave that place and find the next place that's better for you.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't do that, I don't think. I don't think I would have I'd just bawl my eyes out every time someone would pass. I would be really
Well,
useless at it.
you don't stop crying. That's part of the deal. That's part of the deal.
Yeah. And so how do you hold all um that grief that comes up within yourself within that space? Because obviously you develop relationships with people and
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, you have to have a sense that every relationship you have can bring you treasures, um, even after someone's passed, and maybe
Mm,
even especially. Um, and that th- we all have grief in our life. It's there.
mm,
And if to say, well, I can't tolerate that, well, then maybe you you need to learn a little something, because that some grief is really monstrous, and I don't mean to diminish that, but
mm,
that's where you might need some assistance or a companion.
mm,
But you do feel pain as a death doula, as a spiritual companion, and part of it I manage by I have been in what's called spiritual direction, which means I work with somebody who is my spiritual companion, helps me along, and I've worked with her for, oh, I don't know, 7, 8 years. Every month I meet with her and we talk about things. So you build a
mm,
community of other spiritual companions and you support each other.
mm. I really love that idea of um, layering of support
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
you in that space. So let's just wind back a bit. We'll come back to this because I want to talk about the book you did with Rebecca later. But um, the AI
Hmm.
stuff, yeah. What sort of you were listening within that space, but in
Hmm.
terms of storytelling, like I'd like to know more about that, unpick
Okay.
that a little bit. Yeah.
So back in the 80s, gosh, 40 years ago, um, there were two big ideas about how to do artificial intelligence, but the goal was to try and build computer systems that could make decisions as well as humans. That was kind of the thing. And the place that seemed to have hold the most promise was in medicine, because
Mm,
that, there would be, if we could just get more good medical decision making out there, it'd be a better world. And again, so that was one of the big thrusts, and that was where I was involved. Um, and there were two ways to do that. One was to do what AIs are doing now, which is take loads and loads of data and try and find a pattern in it.
mm,
The other was what's called the rules-based system. And that was where you tried to come up with the rules for a good decision. So if someone presented you with a bunch of diagnoses, you had a bunch of symptoms, you had a set of rules to walk you through. Well, it's this and not that. Um, the problem is you had to figure out what those rules were. In order to figure out those rules, you had to talk to experts who knew the answers. And uh, there's this interesting thing about expertise, and this came from my background as well, and that is experts are in large part experts because they don't notice things. Um, they fail to notice the things that really aren't important to their task.
Mm.
But you can't ask somebody, what are you not noticing? It's impossible. So you have to put them in story scenarios where you say, well, what happened? What if we this or what if that? You know, um, tell me a story about a time, and you'll hear things that maybe they didn't realize they were telling you. So it's a whole lot of story work that you do with the experts, and that was my second book was on how to do that, um, how
Mm.
to how to do what was called knowledge acquisition at the time. Um, so there's a lot of story there, and it meant um, I ended up working with experts, for example, in genetics, and I had never had chemistry, not even in high school. So it was a little bit of a challenge, but it was good. It was good.
Wow, the applications are, my mind boggles at the applications for story in every industry. Like, I
Yeah,
hadn't even considered AI as a,
yeah.
yeah, the death I understand, um and the interfaith
Hmm.
especially is a really great
Yeah.
space for it. So with your work with interfaith
Hmm.
communities, what have you been doing in that space?
Um, well, a lot of things. Um, hmm. It's hard to say. It's kind of like what have you been doing in the water, Mr. Fish? Uh,
Well,
um,
so our
but
audience is storytellers. So
that's right. So I'll tell you a couple things. One is I've been associated. We call ourselves the Brothers Three. Sounds like a bad joke, a Baptist, a Muslim, and a Jew. Uh, and we've been meeting together every month since 9/11. And we have come to understand each other's traditions, our own beliefs, and have grown and matured. No one of us has become another religion in the process. Um, but we go and we speak to churches, we speak to communities, we speak to schools, and we kind of share how it is that one can have a meaningful exchange when you look at the world very differently from someone else. Um, and a lot of that revolves around stories. It's not teaching theology, it's talking about stories. Um, and so that's one. And the other is really I did a series for a long time called Diving Deeply. And there I would take stories, usually with a partner from another tradition or another culture, really, not another tradition. And we would dive deeply into the story and say, what's really going on here? Not that there was one single truth we were seeking, but that, what else could we find? And I consider that to be interfaith work because it's really intercultural work,
Mm,
but it's one that one enters with humility and
mm,
says, I don't have the answers, and I don't think there's a single answer there. I'm just a sojourner here trying to learn what I can.
mm. And I like that because everybody would be coming at a single story from a different perspective. And so, yeah, everyone sees different things in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and people will always hear different things, no
Mm,
matter, and you'll always, I have stories that I tell often, and I never tell the same story twice. It's always a different story, both because the audience is different, but I'm also different, and
mm,
I'll hear different things in it. Um,
mm.
and sometimes they'll grab me by the throat and say, "You missed me." So
Tell me now.
tell me now.
So when you were starting out, did you have a preference for a certain type of story, or do you just, yeah.
When I started, with my formal training in this and all, I was very interested, in particular, in Jewish stories. That's my faith tradition, and and I think there's a lot of really good Jewish stories. So I really specialized in that for probably a decade. Um, but I realized that I needed to expand my breadth. And so
Mm,
that's where I really got started in taking the opportunity to spend time with other cultures. And that was
mm,
good. That was,
mm,
yeah. But I started, and I like to say cultures or traditions are like languages. And some people only have one language, like if you're an American. Um, some people have many languages, but most people have a language, a mother tongue. And that's the way this is, So we have cultures, and I have cultures and traditions, and I appreciate things that I've learned from people around the world. I'll always be who I am, but who that is changes. I'll have my mother tongue, but
mm.
I'm trying to become multilingual. So
And that's done through listening, I imagine. So,
yes, yes. Well,
yeah,
and like languages, it's by immersing yourself in the culture. So yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
great. And so during COVID, I stumbled across your YouTube channel and found Rebecca,
Okay.
and her
Yeah.
story about became the very first story that I love this story. I mean, it just resonates with me so
Mhm.
much. And Rebecca's already been on the podcast already, but I'd love to hear both about your YouTube experience during that COVID period, but also the book that you and Rebecca went on to
Right.
write. Yeah.
So, well, when COVID hit, I fortunately, because I have a technology background, it didn't take me long to get onto the YouTube and Zoom and all those things. Um, and so I really just kind of jumped in with both feet and to do that. Um, I hadn't figured out, and there's still limited ways in which I can do end of life work online. But there's plenty of opportunities to do grief work online. Um, and so Rebecca and I kind of met and shared a lot of background spiritually, even though we're two really different people. And I that's wonderful. I treasure that. Um, and so, but we had enough of an interest in stories about grief and loss and end of life and this diving deeply idea that we put together this program that was 4 6-week um, uh, exercise workshops on different aspects of dying and living. Um, and we did that for almost a couple of years. Um, and it started to really refine itself. And we said, there's only so many hours in the day. Wouldn't it be nice to share these stories more broadly? And from that came the book. The challenge, we had a lot of challenges. One is, she lives in Spain and I live in upstate New York, and we've still have not met. We had a couple of close calls, but never met in person. But uh, neither one of us wanted to produce what we would call a literary work. We wanted to do something that kind of captured the spirit of the workshops we'd been doing, which meant it had to have something of an oral flair to it. And it also had to open the door to conversation at the end of each story. Well, the second part was easier because we could just say, well, here's some of the things we've done, and you might want to
Mhm.
try these, and refining those. We found each of us writing in an oral style was really hard, um, because part of being an oral storyteller, which is what I consider myself, is that I use rhythm, I use volume, I use spacing, and boy, that's the only way to write that down is like in poetry, and I'm not a poet. So so that was the challenge, but I'm very pleased with the way it came out. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it was on sale not long ago and I forgot to do it on the day, so I will get it because I'm really looking forward to diving into those
Yeah.
stories and just seeing the work that you've done with it. And so you said you have published other things before, did you?
Two other books on artificial intelligence. So that
Yeah.
was back
Yeah.
back then. Not I they're not even in print anymore.
Yeah.
They're a long time gone.
Yeah. Great. So this podcast is called The Heart of Storytelling. What
Mhm.
do you think is at the heart of storytelling?
Um, well, I think at the heart of storytelling is connection between people. And as I've said before, an open-hearted connection between people. I think it's about this amazing contradiction of being public facing and humble. And and that's what it takes. You have to be able to listen to yourself and listen to the audience. And I don't like to even use the word audience, listen to
Mm.
the other people. And that for me, that's what's important. Um, and to take a delight in the unexpected. So
Mm. And I'm really intrigued about your answer to the next question, which is what I always ask afterwards, with where is storytelling going to be in the future, given the enormous amount of technology we have, and what's its relevance today?
well, I believe, and I'm saying this now more as a scientist than a storyteller, that storytelling is the way that we as humans live. I don't think we can navigate in this world without stories.
Mm.
Now, that puts a slightly different spin on the word story,
Mm.
but it gets to the heart, another heart, which is that's how we make sense of the world. And it's how we communicate what we understand. And it's how we develop an expectation of what's about to happen next. We do that all with our story brain. Um, Technology, I don't think has, it's just another medium for storytelling. I don't think you can get rid of storytelling if you've still got humans around.
Mm.
Um, but um, it's made it, I think the challenge that technology presents to storytelling is not how easy it is to tell a story, but um, how our attention has become short term. Um, there's nothing I'd rather do than tell a story that lasts for an hour or two. I can't do that online. And people, when they come to a performance, I get antsy. Um, but I don't do performances very much. I do workshops and retreats, and that's an opportunity to take that long form. So I think the challenge to storytelling that comes from technology is that people have to learn to slow down a little bit. Um, but beyond that, I don't think we're ever going to get rid of storytelling. It'll,
Oh,
I,
that's refreshing to know from someone who's done computer science.
you know, one of the things that these new models do very well is tell stories. Now, they don't tell great stories, they don't tell insightful stories, but so much, they're trained on everything we've written. And
Mm.
what do? We're writing stories all over the place. So they got pretty good at that.
Yeah. I do wonder though, just as a side question,
Mhm.
um, for me, when I read a novel or read a book or read a story, there's something soulful in it that draws me to it. There's
Mhm.
something that's deeper. I don't know that the AI can do the formula, but I don't know that it can capture the soul
I would agree, and I would
Yeah.
agree there. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So tell me about these workshops and retreats and things that you do.
Well, what I love to do is they have to do more with grief and storytelling, but in a spiritual sense. And I like to take people out in the woods for 3 days into a retreat center. It's not camping,
Not creepy.
um, not creepy, but uh, and give people the opportunity to sit and explore their own experience, to prompt them with stories and some music and some creative activities, and just kind of nurture the flower and let it start to blossom on its own. You never know what's going to come. Um, we did a retreat a couple of years ago when and this was for a group of individuals who didn't really know each other, but knew there were three of us leading it and knew one of us. That's why they had come. And we walked into the room. There were about 25 people there, and the room was quiet. And there was none of the chatter. There was none of the socializing. People were already starting to work.
Mm.
And that's a nice thing. Um, I'll share an exercise that I learned. I do a lot of work in the indigenous community, the Native American community. And one teacher whose method I've adopted or stolen, depending upon your point of view, um, he'll have his students go out. You do these, and I like to do them in a natural, and where you have access to nature. Um, and he'll have his students go out and find a tree and put their hand on the tree and just stand there for a while and experience whatever they're going to experience and come back. And they share what experiences had, and they're pleasant, and they're usually warm. And then he says, okay, now I want you to go back out again, find the same tree, and this time before you touch it, ask its permission.
Mm.
And everything shifts. Everything shifts. And to me, that's a big part of what storytelling can do, is to say, let me imagine a different world, maybe a world I don't even know how it's filled.
Mm.
But I have the ability to do that. So let me go there. And all sorts of wonderful things open up when you do that.
What a wonderful memory. Thank you. I imagine you've got lots of really great experiences of working with people at end of life or with grief.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
is there anything that you're able to share without breaching confidentiality, of course?
yeah. Um, let's see. A couple immediately come to mind. They're fighting with me now. Uh, um, one is I was working with this young woman. She was in her 40s, and she was divorced. They had one child that lived with her, who was about 10, and she got hit with a really terrible cancer, and she wasn't going to make it. It's very clear. And so she went to stay with her mother, who happened to be nearby, and her sister was there all the time to help. And, there was a lot of pain around what's going to happen to the boy, because he would go to live with his father, and it had been an acrimonious divorce, unfortunately. Um, and so nobody wanted to face this inevitability that was really knocking on the door. Um, and I was sitting with them in their living room, and this had been going on for, I don't know, 3 months, a long time. And I said to the mother and her sister, I said, why don't you go take a walk? They said, well, we can't. What if she dies? I said, well, if she dies, she's going to die, but I'll be here. You can leave, you can walk. And after much anxiety, they decided to walk. And they walked for, I don't know, half an hour or so. And they came back and she was still living. Um, but what they realized was that they could leave her and that they could proceed without her,
Mm.
even though it was just a symbolic leaving. And it wasn't long after that she was able to pass. And I see that happen so often
Mm.
that there's some problem in the family or the couple or whatever, something unresolved that it seems like until that's resolved, the person can't die.
Mm.
And sometimes it's things that can be resolved, and sometimes it's things it can't.
Mm.
And so you have to give people the opportunity that those who are going to survive to leave and for them to take the step away. And then that's usually when a much more peaceful, more pleasant death occurs. So
Mm.
that's one.
Mm. Wow. So, how has working in this space changed you as a person? Have you changed in many ways?
I think so. um, I in ways that are sometimes difficult to describe,
Mm.
to know myself. But I know that I'm much more acquainted with grief now than I used to be, and I
Mm.
can bring that into my stories more effectively.
Mm.
Um, I can I can tell a story about grief, and while it will bring the grief into the room and into me, um, it's no longer something to be frightened of. It's
Mm.
something to be embraced. And I think that's made a big change in who I am.
Mm.
Because I can do that now for myself and just casually, not when I'm in a formal role,
Mm.
do that as well.
Mm. I think during COVID, there was this mass facing of death and mortality. Like it was this
Hmm.
big people had not. I mean, I remember meeting a woman. She was in her 60s, and I asked her had she even considered her own death, and she went, "No, I haven't thought about it." I said, "Have you ever done a will?" Or she hadn't, and my mind just blew open that someone hadn't given it any thought whatsoever. I guess grief is a really big topic.
It
And I
is.
don't know what the culture's like in America for this, but do people talk about it and are things shifting?
I think things are shifting, but they're not really talking about it yet.
Mm.
What I mean by that is I think the power of unaddressed grief is getting stronger and stronger. So we've not yet turned the corner to start to deal with it, but it's around the next corner.
Mm.
And there are many more people now who are, there are a lot of books on grief and this. So it's starting to happen, but I think what people are concerned about, and in a sense rightfully so, is if you haven't been developing the tools to wrestle with this, it's really hard. Um, and if all of a sudden you've got, you know, 7 of 10 people around you in the middle of acute grief, well, that's a pretty lousy place to be. So I don't know quite I'm confident we'll get through it, but I think it's going to be a really
Imagine
tough,
that the work that you're doing, though, is
yeah.
helping to break down some of those walls that people have
Yes.
or fears that people have around
Yep.
facing it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are some of the things that you come up with, like when you're dealing with people in those spaces, what are the things that you're presented with often?
Um, I think the people who find their way to me might fall into a few categories. One is people who are in the face of it,
Mm.
and that's one whole kind of thing. And there's no longer any denying that this is going on. It's in the middle of it, and that's one set of experiences. Another are the folks who have had a loss, kind of tucked it aside, and then for whatever reason have said, "Oh, I'm going to have to deal with that again." And so they have kind of their own impetus. It's not an immediate thing that's happened, but something has reminded them and they're coming back. And those are wonderful people to work with because they're ready to explore a little bit. It's hard work, but they're ready to explore. Um, and I think then I also spend a lot of time with old people. Um, and they're more ready to talk about it because it's a little hard to deny. Although I have one client who approached me and said, I think I ought to start working on this. And she said, I don't have anything in particular right now, but, I said, yeah, well, how old are you? Because this was a call. And she said, well, I'm in my 80s. I said, but yeah, this would be a good time.
I had a ladies group a few months ago, and they're all in their 70s or 80s, and I told stories that were just
Mm-hmm.
folk and fairy tale wonder tales.
Mm-hmm.
But every single conversation that came up was about death or grief, and
Yeah.
I didn't go in with that thinking that at
Right,
all, and I
right.
felt very out of my depth with, oh, I'm not quite sure how to manage this. And I'm not trained as
Yeah.
a psychologist. And
Sure,
so
sure.
what sort of advice would you have for people who have, would like to work in this space as a storyteller, working in death and grief
Yeah.
and maybe not haven't got qualifications, formal corporate
Yeah.
qualifications? Yeah.
I don't know if there are, I think you have death cafes in Australia. I know they're
Yeah, we
pretty
do.
much
Yeah.
worldwide. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be one suggestion is to attend a couple of grief death cafes just listen and just
Mm.
see what happens.
Mm.
Because I think that's a great way of putting your toe in the water without having to take on any risk except that you might be moved yourself, but you're not, no one else is depending on you at that moment. So that's one thing. Um, there are some wonderful books out there about grief. Um, but I think, and people will gravitate to those. I don't think there's one book that has an answer there in that
Mm.
regard. Um, but I do think, and I'm not just saying this, I do think our book is a way of, because it doesn't adopt a single attitude about death or loss. It really tries to take many different cultural perspectives on it. And I think it's another way to say, well, gee, maybe I can imagine myself telling this story. Um, or maybe I could tell it in a small group of friends and we could try some of the questions at the end. And that's a way of just kind of priming the pump um, and seeing what can happen. But mostly you just have to learn how to listen.
Be a good listener. It's
Yeah,
pretty good advice, I think. I think
yeah.
most storytellers, we're all good listeners, I think. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to tell the stories.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. Well, Jim, you've been incredible. I've learned so much from you today, and I really, really appreciate your time and your knowledge
Sure.
and your wisdom and yeah, everything that you've shared. It's been really, really great. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Do we have time for one short story?
Oh,
Can
I would
we
love
have?
that.
Yeah.
I would love that.
I'll tell you who won. The river, the River Olu run won, and this is a story. And we don't really have time for the story behind this story. It came to me from a woman who lives in Nigeria, who lives in the region called Yoruba, which is where a lot of great storytelling comes from. And it was a story she wanted to tell because she had grown up with it. And for her, it wasn't a magical story, it was a historic story. This is one of those things that this is the way the world is. And it goes like this. There once was a time when a great drought had come to the land, and it was a terrible drought. The grass was withering. The animals were thin. The ground was hard. The wind was hot and dry. And everyone was hungry and thirsty. And so this one family, father and a mother and a son and a daughter, decided they had to leave. And they had to try and find food and especially water somewhere. And so they headed out and they took what meager supplies they had and they went for a few days and there was nothing to be found. And their supplies were almost gone. And the children were having such a terrible time. They were crying, they were aching, they were moaning, and mother were hungry, mother were thirsty. So the father said, well, I'll go out and see some trees in the distance. Maybe there's some animals there. I'll go hunt some game and we'll be able to eat. I'll come back by evening. And he left. And he didn't come back. And they waited until morning and he still wasn't there. And now the children are absolutely miserable. They're weeping. Mother, we're hungry. Mother, we're thirsty. It hurts so much. And mother had been carrying water in a calabash in the back, on her back. It was empty now. She said, I'll go get some water. I'll find some water. I'll be back by evening. You wait here. And she covered them up. And she headed out. And she came back in the evening, and her calabash was dry. And now the children are weak. And they're saying, Mother, water, we're dying. And her heart broke, but she didn't know what to do. So they slept through the night, and the next morning came, and she said, I'll go out and I'll come back with water. And she headed out again. And she was gone all day. She came back with her calabash, and her calabash was dry. And the children could barely speak. And they said, Mother, we're dying. Mother, we're dying. And in desperation, she took the calabash and she raised it over her head and she smashed it on the ground in front of her. And in that instant, she was turned into a river, the river Olu, which flows to this day. And the river bathed them and nourished them and healed them. And it's understood that if you're a child of the river, if you're the progeny of that boy or that girl, the river Olu will cleanse you spiritually, it'll heal you physically. And if the first water that you drink comes from the river Olu as an infant, then you'll be given one more gift. And that is the gift of only being able to speak the truth. And that if you speak of something that has not yet happened, it will happen. And if you speak of someone about them in a particular way, that's the way they will be. And so I heard from the king of the river Olu when he was telling this story that he's a child of the river. And he's learned he can never say anything ill about anyone because he will injure them if he does. He will make them that negative thing. And so that's the strength of the river Olu that sprang from a mother's desperation for her children and lives on today.
That's a lovely story. I can just see the smashing the calabash and turning into the river. It's just so such a powerful image.
Yeah,
Really, really lovely.
yeah.
Really lovely story. Thank you so
So
much for your time, Jim. You've been
thank
wonderful.
you. Thank you, Alyssa. It's been a real joy.
If you've enjoyed the podcast and would like to support me to continue the work that I'm doing, please head to buymeacoffee.com/Alyssa Curtain and make a donation or sign up for a subscription. This is a passion project, and as such, it is voluntary. So your donations make it easier for me to continue this work. Thank you for your support. Well, that's our episode for today. I hope you've enjoyed learning about storytelling and folktale, fairytale, myth, legend, or personal tales, wonder tales, all sorts of stories, and the art of storytelling and why we really need to continue using it today. You can find more information about me at alyssacurtain.com or at Alyssa Curtain Stories on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I hope that you can find your heart in storytelling.